In this chapter, we're going to focus on the question, is gender related to delinquency? We have touched on gender differences throughout the various chapters, but now we're going to explore the differences in more depth. We're going to cover gender differences in their development, cover differences in delinquency patterns between the males and females. We'll explore various theories for gender delinquency differences, and we will explore how males and females are treated in the juvenile delinquency system. So let's start with the differences in development. At one time, female delinquency was viewed as a emotional or family-related matter, and those few females that did commit true delinquency acts were considered sexual oddities. And that was as a function of their behavior, which was seen as they were having masculine traits or characteristics, and that was referred to as the masculinity hypothesis. These females engaged in delinquent acts such as prostitution or running away, premarital sex, or crimes of passion. They kind of had a connection relative to sex. And when I say crimes of passion, involving killing boyfriends or husbands. But that view no longer is the case. While males still commit more crimes than females, the crimes that females engage in today are very similar to those as males, with the exception of prostitution. And those include things like theft and assault and being involved in gangs. So do gender differences in development pave the way for future differences in misbehaving? And consider that baby girls show greater control over their emotions, while boys are more easily angered and more dependent on their mothers more. We're going to also discuss the socialization, cognitive, and personalities of the genders and how each plays a role in delinquency in general. And we're going to look at how these three, socialization, cognitive, and personality, how these three developments, differences between the two sexes have evolved, and what the differences are, and do those differences actually play a role in delinquency. Socialization differences. This is differences in the way females and males are socialized, and does that affect their development? Although there are few gender-based differences in aggression during the first few years of life, girls are socialized to be less aggressive than boys, and they are also closely supervised by their parents, more so than boys. Males are taught to be more aggressive and assertive, and are less likely to form attachments to others than females. They may seek approval from their peers. Males may seek approval from their peers by knocking them down and running through them on a playing field, while what are the females doing? They're literally cheering them on. The male perceptions of power, their relative freedom, and their ability to hang with their friends, that helps explain some of the gender differences in crime and delinquency. Cognitive differences. It's a nice little chart, kind of condensed the reading material, but to go into it a little bit more expansively. Cognitive differences. There's also differences in cognitive abilities between males and females, and it starts in childhood. Psychologists have noted significant cognitive differences between boys and girls that may affect their antisocial behavior. Girls have been found to be superior to boys in verbal ability, whereas boys test higher in visual spacing, spatial awareness, performance. Girls acquire language faster, learning to speak earlier and with better pronunciation. And possibly their superior verbal skills may enable them to talk rather than to fight. When faced with a conflict, females might be more likely to attempt to negotiate rather than responding passively or resisting physically, especially when they perceive increased threat to having a threat of harm or possibly even death. There's personality differences. As adolescents, males develop self-esteem, and whereas female self-confidence becomes lowered. While there are a number of reasons for this decline when males and females reach their adolescence, one in particular, an important view, is how females feel about themselves, their body shape, and their size, which is the result of society's unrealistic view and high standards of slimness, which results in unhappiness and, of course, the rise in a number of eating disorders. And we're being very general here as we talk about it. We're focusing on self-esteem, self-confidence. When females lose their self-esteem, they also lose their voice, and then they begin to conceal their feelings, and they just accept the view of women that's conveyed by society or by adult authorities. So personality differences. Emotional differences. There are differences in the ways boys and girls regulate their emotions and feelings. While girls are stereotyped as being emotional, that is not the case in many situations, in that both males and females are nearly equal regarding emotions. Girls are more willing to display positive emotions and internalize emotions such as sadness and anxiety, while boys are more apt to display these externalizing emotions such as anger. And girls become more positive as they mature than boys. And these development differences may explain the differences in why males, more so than females, engage in delinquent behavior, as well as it may affect their choice of the type of delinquent behavior each commit. I kind of intertwined our stereotypes here, but just to kind of recap, girls are often stereotyped as talkative, but research shows that's in many situations it's the boys who spend more time talking than girls. And then, as I said, girls are more stereotyped as being more emotional. What causes gender differences? There are several views as to what causes gender differences, and we'll delve into these a little bit more in detail as we move along. But biology. Males and females are different. They have different brain organization. Women are more left-brained and men are more right-brain oriented, and this controls how the different sex operates. Hormones. Differences between males and females relative to hormones. Socialization, which also includes the exposure to learning and culture. Girls and boys behave differently as the result of being exposed to different types of socialization, different type of learning, different type of cultural experiences. So it also begs the question, if socialization, learning, and cultural were equally exposed to boys and girls, then would the delinquency rate be equivalent? Right, that would make sense if we're socializing, girls and boys are experiencing and learning differently based on culture and socialization. It would show that if it was equally exposed, then delinquency rates would be equal. The gender schema theory that was developed by Sandra Bem in 1981. Seems so long ago, but it's not that long ago. Yeah, I guess it was. Over 40 years ago. Almost 40 years ago. According to the gender schema theory, once children have formed a basic gender identity, they start to develop gender schemas. And these are based on children's interactions and observations of others, their environment, and the culture. These gender schemas are used to organize and direct the child's behavior based on his or her society's gender norms and expectations related to the child's gender. According to Bem, our culture polarizes these male and female scripts, hence forcing children to obey these roles. So at an early age, what are children doing? They're seeking out information to define their roles. But not all social scientists agree that there are gender differences. Janet Shibley-Hyde did a meta-analysis study examining gender differences. And before I delve into the study itself, meta-analysis is a statistical method for aggregating research findings across many studies of the same question. So basically, this method uses the findings of a bunch of studies and runs them through a size effect equation, an equation, and these individual effects are averaged to obtain overall effect sizes that reflect the magnitude across all the studies. So it's not a separate study. It is a separate study, but they take studies on the same question and kind of pool them together. And what she found, and she refers to her finding as, and I think it's in the book, gender similarities hypothesis. The gender similarities hypothesis holds that males and females are similar on most, but not all, psychological variables. That is, men and women, as well as boys and girls, are more alike than they are different. She goes on to say that most psychological gender differences are close to zero or very small, with a few differences. Those differences being that men are more physically aggressive and that they approve sex without commitment. They approve of sex without commitment, and that gender differences tend to fluctuate with age. And at certain points, there's a wide gap, and at other points, there's a very narrow gap. But of course, this study is not without critics. But if gender differences did exist, it appears that it might be breaking down at this point, eroding at this point. And in turn, as we might see in the future, gender differences in delinquency could be effective. Right now, the gap is narrowing, and we'll talk a little bit more why that might be. So the next topic is going to be talking about patterns, general patterns in delinquency.